We're live.
Good morning. Welcome to Coffee and Conversations in Special Education. I have a co-host that I am really excited about having here with me today. I've been following her and seeing all the amazing things that she does for children and parents. Maria Davis Pierre is the owner and founder of Autism in Black. Maria, if you would just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and Autism in Black's mission, and then we'll go into discussing our topic.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria Davis Pierre. I am a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. And like Krista said, I am the owner of Autism in Black, Inc. And our mission is to support Black parents who have a child who is autistic. We do that through various means. Advocacy, we do it through consultations, therapy, coaching, then on the flip side, I also train organizations to be more culturally responsive to the Black disability community. So doing a lot of culturally responsive training with a lot of organizations. So that is a little bit about me.
Maria, this is, as you know, because we didn't have much time to talk before, it's my first time kind of chatting with you as we're going live. Do you do trainings with schools and teachers as well in the public school system?
I do. I've done some with my culturally responsive training with some schools and some teachers.
And what are those kind of trainings? What do they look like? And what schools typically contact you when they identify a need for that?
So since the George Floyd death murder, I've had a lot of schools want to become more culturally responsive because they're now aware of how systemic racism is within our school system through every means there is. So they're wanting to train their staff to be more culturally responsive, to better serve their students. And with Autism in Black, we do train on the intersection of race and disability. So a lot of people may not train on that specific intersection. So Autism in Black does that. So they'll just have attended some webinars and they just email me, or they saw me in the Forbes magazine or Forbes interview, and they'll just email me and say, you know, we are very interested in your training. And then we go through the proper channels to make sure and set it up for them.
I would be really interested in your training. I'm going to share with you, since we're sharing about each other for the first time, a little bit about my background, because I have some experience in what you're talking about. And I know firsthand that intersection. I was placed at one point in my teaching career in Miami-Dade County in an EBD self-contained classroom in Liberty City. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know that community, but I was placed there right by the school, Orchardville Elementary, right by what they call the pork and beans projects. And my class was 15 students. They were all African American. They were all boys, except for one girl. I'll never forget her. She could really hang with those boys, but she didn't. She ended up going to a regular education class pretty quickly thereafter. But a lot of those boys were identified as EBD inappropriately. And I was fighting and advocating for them to, I didn't feel that they met the eligibility criteria for EBD. I learned what that criteria was, and I realized that a lot of team members actually don't know what the criteria is. And I think that team members, I've seen in my advocacy practice, and maybe you've seen this too, and I correct it right on the spot, but they tend to use language and words to describe African-American boys in different ways than I see with other clients that I work with. You know, things like, the other day I was in a meeting, bossy. And I said, you're going to have to take that out of you're going to have to take that out of the description. And also I've come to have the position that one cannot be ASD eligible and EBD eligible at the same time.
Yeah, it's, you know, first of all, the EBD category, because it's so disproportionate to Black students, and it's not even a clinical diagnosis, it is just a special education category. It's not a clinical diagnosis, it's not in the DSM. I think of it usually as kind of a throwaway category, especially for Black students, because one, a lot of evaluators are not culturally trained. So a lot of things that are presenting in Black students, they're not seeing it as textbook. This is what is happening in the DSM and this is where I can place you. So it's like, well, I don't know where I can put them. Let me just put them over here. Not realizing that those self-contained classrooms are so harmful to our Black students, because it does set them on the trajectory for school to prison pipeline a lot of times, because as you know, a lot of times once you're placed in that category, then you're seen as a problem child, like, okay, well, let's just try to shoo you on along and then get you as far as we can. But a lot of people don't put the care into the students that needs to be, with that category.
So I know we're talking about school culture, and this might go a little longer than my coffee and conversations typically do, because I really want to talk to you and break some of these things apart. When I was in that classroom, I'll remember when I was first moved there, I was moved from I was co-teaching in a general education environment. And then my principal placed me there. I, even though I saw a lot wrong with it, I enjoyed the role because I was able to make a lot of difference and modify behaviors in positive ways. And then I was able to successfully transition those students back to the general education environment with tears in eyes, because I loved them so, but I knew that that placement was not their proper placement. So on the first day when I settled into that classroom, I was assigned a gentleman who was there I'm just telling you what it is straight up. He was introduced to me. He was a African-American man that was from the area. And he was a paraprofessional at the school, but he was placed in my room for the purpose of restraining the students. And he was I was told that he knew when it was appropriate to restrain and to seclude, and that he would do that on his own. So that some of my advocacy was, and I would notice that if a student would talk back to him, restraint. Speak in any sort of way that was inappropriate, restraint. And so that was one of my fights, was to put an end to that. I can talk about school culture as well, and we can go into that. My first school was Frederick Douglass Elementary, which is in Overtown, and that was one of my best teaching experiences. I co-taught with a veteran teacher that was from a neighboring community, and she was amazing. Her teaching style and some of her ways, I won't go into it because some people, she was a little old school, but I'll tell you one thing about her. She got all of those children to read. And one of the things that she told me is that instead of everybody coming in and being a guinea pig to children in the inner city, and trying to solve all of their problems and come in on their white horse, let's say, if everybody would just be a master at what their trade is, they could really do justice to these students. So if our role was to teach them reading and math, then that needed to be our role. And she did do that well. I observed other teachers I saw duct tape over the mouth of students. I knew in this school that it was a cultural norm, a school culture thing, that parents would actually tell the teachers that you can use physical force to the child if they act up or act out. And one time I called a parent because I needed assistance with a student, not expecting that they were going to come, take them out of the classroom and get physical with them in the restroom. Yeah. When he came back to the class, I'll never forget it. His eye was swollen, and I had to get DCF involved. So there's much more to school culture than that. But do you have any comments about anything I just said?
I do. I think when we think of school culture, thinking of how that particular school has cultivated the environment and what they deem, appropriate. And a lot of times what they deem appropriate is not legal. It is not a policy. It's just something that they've created. And you see it a lot, and it does impact Black students, especially Black students in receiving SPED services. There is just, you've created this, and, parents are oftentimes not in the know. So they're not knowledgeable a lot on what the actual policy procedures and the law is. And then, parenting while Black is a real thing. So we're like, hey, we want to keep our child in school and out of prison, and we don't want them to die. So we have to go by certain means. And a lot of people don't understand those certain means. Parents are on especially Black parents are on a fine line of, am I going to have to get them ready for what being Black in America is, or do I shelter them as a child? Do I need to take it into my own hands? Because I know if I let it in the hands of others, my child can very well not come home this evening, right? So there is a fine line that they are trying to balance. And sometimes do we go over that line? Yes, we do. But in the same sense, they're also thinking of it as protecting their child. Like, let me handle it so nobody else is going to handle it. Because when somebody else handles it, I know what that end result can be. So, I think there has to be a closing that gap between schools and parents, because schools oftentimes leave parents out so much that they're feeling at a loss, even out of the inner city schools, that they cultivate an environment that is not welcoming to parents. You have meetings that are not at times that parents can come to, and the only way that you see parents being involved is if they come to your PTO meetings. If your PTO meeting is early in the morning, or when I have to go to work, or it's late and you don't provide childcare, then you're kind of making it so I can't attend and be involved. So, schools have to really close that gap on how they deem parents being involved.
When you were talking, I'm working with a client right now. English is her second language, and that's a huge barrier. I've found in IEP, in effective parent IEP advocacy. There's a lot to navigate and wrap around with that. Her first language is Spanish. She gets through with English, but in an academic kind of a meeting, it's very difficult. And so I was in a meeting, and I pay attention to some of these subtle things. She's giving her input in the parent input section, and every other thing that she's saying, they're putting into quotation marks. And so that to me was really powerful. And I said, wait a second, because this is the one section where my client gets the chance to speak fully without it being a team decision. This is her input part. And I don't see you all putting in quotation marks the teacher's observations about reading and math. So I would appreciate it if you wouldn't condescend my client with putting what she has to say in quotation marks. And I really do feel like part of that in that particular community, which is not, it also depends on what county you're in, right? Miami-Dade, the minority is the majority, right? But in this county, having English be your second language is actually the minority in this particular county. Okay. And I felt like they subconsciously brought in a bias that she was less educated or less prepared to participate meaningfully at the IEP table than her counterparts.
Yeah, instead of actually making sure she had an interpreter, or making sure that the paperwork was in her first language. So, things that we know that they are very capable of being able to do. A lot of times they don't even let parents know that this is a right that they have, to have it in their native language. So it's just another way of pushing parents out, or, especially in, because I work with a lot of Haitian clients, and they'll bring another child in to do the interpretation. I'm like, you don't have to do that. That puts your child in a situation, and then we know that maybe everything is not getting communicated back and forth.
Exactly.
And you don't have to do that. There is an obligation on their part to make sure that somebody is there to be able to interpret what is going on in the meeting for you. So I think a lot of times schools just don't tell parents everything that they have a right to. It's happened with me before. And I work in the field, and I'm a therapist, and I know things, and you'll get in there, and it is overwhelming when you're one parent against 10 other people, and they're using abbreviations, and abbreviations that they've created in their school, and you're like, well, what's that? And then they're looking at you like, well, it's this, and it's like they are trying to be dismissive, so it's a culture, again, that they've created.
Something that I want to touch on in terms of school culture, and you can interrupt me at any time. I want to talk a little bit about the culture of no. And I also want to talk about, I've been now in over 750 IEP meetings in the state of Florida, in every district in Florida. And I've now represented parents in a total of 13 states and counting. And when I'm in an IEP meeting, I can automatically feel the culture of the team members. And this, I'm not talking about culture like ethnically or racially, or I'm talking about the collective willingness. The heart part of it is what I call it. The ability to be creative. The difference between the response of, oh, we don't do that here, or we don't offer that continuum. That's not how we do things in this county, or whatever. But a willingness to think outside the box, to be creative, to think of creative ways that you can meet the needs of the student. I can see that in the first 30 minutes of a meeting. Mm-hmm. What do you have to say about that? What's some of your experiences on that?
It's the same. There's meetings I've been to, and just my presence alone, they're like, okay, well, we got to make sure we're doing what we need to do. And then there's other meetings I've been to, and as soon as we've said hi, they switch, and it's like, no, we can't do that. No, I don't know why we're having this meeting. And it's just like, well, what is going on here? You're not even listening to anybody. You've already made up your mind before you even came to the meeting on what you were going to do and how it was going to be implemented. And now you're just doing this for the sake of doing it, but you have already made up your mind before even coming to this meeting. And it's like, how it baffles me, some of the things schools do. I'm just like, how are you getting away with this?
It's called a culture of no and a culture of predetermination, right? We have predetermined, we know better than you, and this is what he or she needs, and it's that is absolute. Whereas if you have a culture of collaboration, that collaboration is among all team members, including the parent and whomever the parent chooses to have attend that meeting.
Exactly.
And it's a mutual respect. And it's sometimes we agree to disagree, right? And then there are things that we can do when we reach that impasse, but it's how we communicate with one another that counts, and how we hear each other.
Exactly. And I think a lot of schools really do need to respect the parent as a team member. The parent is the only team member that does not change. They're the one that doesn't change. Every other team member will eventually change, but the parent is there. So you would think people would be, listen a little bit more to what the parent has to say, rather than pushing them so far out that they feel that they're not even a valuable team member in regards to the whole process. And it's something that just really gets me going, because I'm like, I don't understand how you don't see how not only are you being so dismissive to the student, you're now being dismissive to the student's parent. So you're making them both feel like they don't have a say in what's going on. And it's not even, sometimes I'm like, is it coming out of your pocket? Is it coming out of your paycheck? Is that why, you're so upset and saying no? Are you really gonna, pay for this out of your paycheck? Because
I can speak to the fear in speaking freely. I can speak to that. Being in Miami, working as a special education teacher in Miami-Dade County, you are put in a role where you almost feel like, and I'm speaking individually, I can't speak for everybody, but you almost feel like you're an elementary student yourself. And if you talk out of turn, or if you cut up, you're going to be in trouble with the people at the top. And there's a fear of that. At the latter part of my career, I abandoned that fear, and I advocated free of that. And that's a whole nother talk for a whole nother conversation. But I did all of that, and I was not retaliated against in the end. And my fears were turned out to not be valid. And I'm glad that I did that, but I had to get to that point of veteran, master's level teaching to have the confidence to do that. And also to have taken the time and had the knowledge to actually know if the things that I thought sounded right were actually not right, or were right. I don't want us to sound like we're teacher or district personnel bashing, because, right. Yeah, I want to say something. If you're a teacher or you're an administrator and you're watching this, I want you to know that your work counts. You are on the front line. And I get emotional. I almost start crying when I say this. I'm not even being funny, because I'm so passionate about this. You all have a chance to advocate for children on the front line, for all children. And you have the chance to advocate for the most marginalized children. Don't be afraid to advocate. Don't be afraid to go against the grain in your next IEP meeting when you know that something's not right. You can change a child's life, and you have the power to do that. You are on the front line. And I have been in meetings with individuals that have not. I was in a meeting where a teacher with all the top district compliance staff there said, no, I don't think that that's appropriate. And after the meeting, I actually wrote him personally. He never responded. If he hears this, because he follows my page, he'll know who I'm talking about. He probably felt responding to me was going a little too far, but I have so much regard for him. And I have so much regard for all of what you do, but don't lose the heart of it, because that's why you went into this.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people think it's teacher bashing or district bashing, and it's not. There are just hard truths that are uncomfortable. And, you know, there's research that backs up a lot of these hard truths, which is why they're truths. And you have to go in and close that gap and be different. You have to be aware of your biases and how they impact that room. Not only is the culture of the environment of the school coming in there, but the culture of that individual, that student, that parent is coming in there. And if you're not aware of how things are done in a culture, you can very well be harmful to, you know, the parent and the child. So it is about hard truth. And sometimes it's so hard to be truthful with ourselves, because it is hurtful to be like, you know, oh, I have been hurting these people. You know, when I was a therapist before I had children and I was going into IEP meetings, you know, I was just going in there and doing the job that I was taught. When I became a parent who has a autistic daughter who has an IEP, and then I was like, you know what, I could have been doing so much better in the meetings that I was going in, because now I am on the other side and I know how it feels. So I think a lot of times we think we don't have to go above and beyond, but sometimes it is necessary to go above and beyond what we are supposed to do to make sure we are implementing the change that needs to happen. Because like you said, we can very well change the trajectory of a child and how they go. I've seen some amazing teachers that get blackballed because they are just that amazing and they care about students over anything. So yeah, it's hard work. It is really hard work to have to go out there, especially when the policies and the procedures are as such. And we know that you don't have a lot of wiggle room in that because it is coming from so many people. And I'm like, you know, a lot of times we're talking about teachers and principals, but really we need to be talking about district. We need to be talking about statewide. We need to be talking about national, because they're the ones bringing these policies in. So yeah, it is just very difficult work, but in the same sense, sometimes you have to go against the grain to be able to make that change.
When you were talking, I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking in a lot of districts where I've seen a certain culture, you go into IEP meetings in totally different schools in different regions within the district, and the responses are the same, right? And the culture is the same. And that only leads me to believe, I've come to the point in my career that I believe that the school culture is from the top down, right?
Definitely.
It's from the top down. And so you have the problem of IEP team members at the school level being trained from the top down to do things that are not appropriate and that are incorrect, and they're following out process and procedure, and they're lost in a bureaucratic cycle. And that's why I say, don't lose the heart of it. This is not just about, I was in a meeting yesterday with my client. If she's seeing this, she knows that I'm talking about her. She's an amazing parent advocate, and she works for the school district herself. And she happens to be an African-American parent, and she fights for her child. But her and I have been doing this together for about 2 years now. We're in the meeting. As soon as we get in, they're rushing the meeting. It's all about the time clock. It might not be that an hour is enough for us today. And trust me, my client, if she hears me, she knows she's not going to let you rush her. That's not even an option, right? But they were more concerned about process and procedure. Did we discourage you? That's an important question. Don't get me wrong. Did you get your procedural safeguards? That's really important. Don't get me wrong. But they weren't concerned about how, or they didn't show evidence. They were concerned about, how are we going to reach and teach the student? How are we going to work on that self-esteem? How are we going to close that gaps? And so I was thinking about our presentation today, and I was thinking this was a culture more of process, procedure, We don't want this IEP to be flagged. That's what she said. If we don't finalize it today, if we have to go into another meeting, it's going to show up red in our system. And that was the bigger concern. But we need to write an appropriate IEP. That's the actual life-changing thing that we're trying to do for this child.
Exactly. I can tell from my own personal experience. I have 2 children who have IEPs, and none of their meetings are an hour. They're just not. They're not. And it's just not an hour. And I am an advocate. I am a therapist, but I have my attorney that comes into the meeting because I want to stay in my parent role. And then my advocate comes in and they advocate doing their job. But our meetings are not nowhere near an hour. I'll be happy if we get out of there in 2 hours. But yeah, they're long. And we could all be agreeing on the same thing, but they are just that thorough. And I appreciate that because it lets me know that they're really trying to be unique to my child's needs. I've seen IEPs that have had wrong names on them. And it's like, how did we even get to this point where the student's name is not on here? So yeah, it's a process. And when people do not know their rights, what they're afforded to, then things like this happen. We know that there's cookie cutter IEPs out there where everybody in that class has the same exact IEP. And that's not right because each child is very different. So yeah, it's definitely a rush process, and they're trying to do some check marks and things like that, which we get because a lot of times there is not enough manpower to get through everybody, especially when we talk about school psychologists. They are definitely overwhelmed with evaluations, especially now since COVID, and a lot of them, they were not able to do a lot of evaluations. But we still have to be able to go in and do our jobs and do them effectively and do right by the children.
I have 2 more questions for you, and this is longer than I normally go, but I love hearing you talk. I know that you're a licensed therapist and mental health counselor, right? And so you work with parents directly. I have a lot of parents that the child is going through it, right? But the parent is also going through it. And I know some parents just put such a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves. What can you say to those parents?
Well, as parents, we are our hardest critics. We strive for perfection, and that's just not realistic. We put so much on our plates, and we set these goals that are up here. And when we don't meet the goal, it's like, oh, we failed. No, the goal is unrealistic in itself. We have to be more realistic with ourselves, and we have to take care of self. We have to make sure that we are doing intentional self-care. Because if we can't take care of ourselves, then how can we be effective in all the roles that we have to do? Especially for my parents who are doing crisis schooling right now. You are the teacher, you're the PE coach, you're the lunch lady, you're the nurse, and then you're still mom. And if you're working, you're still, have your job as an employee. So there's so many roles that we're trying to navigate. There's just not enough time to do it. So you have to make sure you're doing intentional self-care. You have to make sure that if you're getting to the point that you need extra assistance, that you reach out to a therapist. There's nothing wrong with going to therapists. Therapy. I'm a therapist with a therapist, right? I'm wholeheartedly 100% in, because it is good to have that unbiased person to help you figure some things out and to be honest in that space that is a safe space for you. So don't ever feel like you're doing it alone, because there are so many avenues for you to be able to go out and get some help and have somebody listen to you. And just don't put so much pressure on yourself. This is what I tell my parents all the time. We will put so much pressure on ourselves. Like, I have to do my 40 to-do things on my to-do list today. And if I don't do it, then I have failed at life. No, we have to be realistic. We're not going to accomplish those things, but maybe I can get my top 3 things done today. And anything else after that is extra bonus points.
Thank you. And I can relate to all of that. I've experienced, I know all about the mom guilt, and I'll put something personal out there. And some of my clients know that I went through my husband having a stroke when I was 7 months pregnant with our third. And I was running this advocacy business the way that I'm running it now, 7 months pregnant. I didn't know if he was going to talk again. They told me that he might not. We went through a lot, cognitive therapy. My daughter saw a lot. There was a lot of depression that followed that. And I still experience guilt for that period. And I still think about and beat myself up about how I could have done that differently. And now, thank God, I'm working with this amazing therapist that happens to work for Broward County Public Schools. And I've referred many parents to her. And I know that every day at the end of the day, sometimes I have to say, what you did, Krista, it was enough. You did your best. You showed up as best as you could with what you had to offer. It might not have been perfect, but tomorrow you can try again and you can do better. And we have to cut ourselves a little bit of a break. It doesn't mean that we don't try to improve what we're doing, but you are enough. You are perfectly chosen for your child. You're doing the best that you can do.
Exactly.
Now my last question to you, I'm sorry, did you have something else to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add that caregiver stress is very real. So, when you are in the role of a caregiver, like you were for your husband, or like if you have a child who has a disability, that adds on more stress as well, because we're so striving for even more perfection. So just know that you do have to give yourself some grace in that.
Right. It's not easy. It's really not easy. If you were to talk to teachers and administrators that are seeing issues with their school culture, they're seeing issues with inclusivity, they want to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. How could we give them practical ways to move forward? What would you say to them that they can help be a part of the positive change?
One is being honest about the biases within the school system, and making effective steps to change those, having appropriate trainings for your staff to be able to be there more for your students, understanding that just because one person reacts like this, not everybody's going to have the same reaction. To come in with open minds and be more inclusive to parents, because parents are experts in their children. So just coming from that standpoint, and training, culturally responsive training. I can never stress that enough. Decolonizing the curriculum. My kids want to see themselves in the curriculum. They want to see people who look like them in the curriculum. Not being afraid of the word racism. We're getting to the point where people are so afraid of that word, and it's like, oh my God, I'm not racist. No, but the practices within the school system are, and it's being oppressive, and it's oppressive to people who look like me, who are parents who are trying to navigate it, and it's oppressive to my kids as well. So being truthful with knowing that these systems are in place to keep us behind, and moving forth and dismantling those systems.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me today. This has been my favorite one so far, and I really mean that. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with you again, and hopefully over many, many years together. Anybody that comments, we will respond to your comments on this video. We will take a time today and also this evening to make sure we address anybody's comments. And also, we're going to plan to do other things together. So if you have an interest, make sure that you let us know. Maria, please also put all of your information in case a parent wants to contact you personally. And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.